Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to teach you how to use Golang to create a very simple API with Gin. So Go is a language developed by Google. It's a server-side language. I think it's an amazing language for creating APIs. It's really fast at handling many requests. It has automatic garbage cleanup, so it's good for memory-wise. It uses concurrency, so it can actually handle many requests concurrently. And that's one of the things that makes it really fast, and I think it's a great language to develop more modern APIs. And I think it's going to be adopted by more and more big companies. So to get started, we're going to be using this framework called Gin, and we're also just going to be using Google's UUID. This is just to generate IDs because we're not going to be integrating a database in this. I think that could be a video in itself. So yeah. To get started, let's head over to our IDE. So I'm using Golang, and I really recommend this. I know other people like to use Visual Studio Code because it has a nice Go extension, but whatever you guys want to use is fine. So let's get started by first initializing our modules. So what we want to do is type in go mod init and then the name of your module. So I'm just going to call this API tutorial. So then that creates the module. Then let's add in these packages. So just copy and paste. So this is go get gin-gonic/gin. It's a bit of a weird name. And then let's also get the UUID. So I'm just gonna enable module integration on my IDE. Okay, so to get started, let's create a new Go file called main.go, and the package for this is main. Let's also create our main function. So this is the function that gets run when the program is run. So let's take a look at Gin's documentation. So the quick start is quite nice. So it initializes a router using Gin default. They have a simple endpoint setup here. It's a get method on ping, and it just returns so this is marshaled into JSON that gets returned to the server, so message pong, and then it runs. So let's just create our own one. So gin.default. So this library automatically imports the packages. If yours doesn't, make sure to import them manually. We're not actually going to create a handler for anything yet, so let's just do r.run. Here you specify the port or maybe a specific IP address. This does return an error, so let's say error is equal to that, and if the error is not equal to nil, I just want to do log.fatal error. So now we can use this R, which is our router, to create endpoints and handle them. So let's just do a test one for now. So it's going to be a get. The path is just going to be the root path, and then expect handlers. So let's create a handler here. So func get handler. So this is just temporary, we're going to overwrite this later. And then let's put this here. So when this endpoint is hit, it's going to call this function, and one of the things that Gin is going to pass to us is a pointer to Gin context. So Gin context is unique for every request, and it gives us a bunch of nice functions like bind JSON. It has JSON, which is going to be a return string, and I'll go through a bunch of these, but just for now, let's do c.json. The first parameter is code, which is our status code that we're returning, so let's say 200. And the second one is the interface, so we can pass in anything, and it's going to marshal it into JSON and return that. So to make this easier for now, Gin offers us this type called h, and we can actually explore this. So let's open this up. So when we look at this, h is just a type, which is a map of string to interface. So what it's saying is we can put anything here, let's say message, and then, here has to be a string, but then that's because in JSON the key is always a string, but then the value can be anything. So in this case, I'm going to put true. And then just to show you guys that's true, let's do message 2, and let's say hello world. Okay, cool. So now we have a simple endpoint here. When this root path is hit, it's going to call get handler. get handler is going to accept that gin context, so that's passed in by gin through this router here, through that method. And then all we're doing is saying c.json, so this is the return JSON that what gin does is behind the scenes it writes this to the response handler. So yeah, let's run this. In your terminal, type go run main.go. So this runs this file. Just allow it through the firewall. Now you want to have something like Postman installed. So this is what I like to use. Some people also like to use Insomnia. So whatever you want to use for making API requests. So then let's open up localhost 5000, because as you can see here, we chose port 5000. And let's just do the root path. So you can see here, we are getting a 200 back. We are getting a 200 with message true. And this is not a string, this is actually just the true value and a string of hello world. So yeah, that's working. Now let's create a bit of a CRUD. We're not going to connect a database, so instead we're just going to use some variables and slices and arrays. So the first thing I want to do is create a type. So that's going to be user, and it's just going to be a struct which has a couple of fields. So it has ID, which is a string, name, which is a string, and age, which is an int. So let's add in the JSON for these. So this is just so that when JSON marshals these, it knows what to set as the keys. Okay, so we have this. Let's create a variable now, not a type. And let's say users, so plural, is going to be a slice of user. So now let's, still in the same handler, actually let's rename this to get users. And rename it here as well. All I want to do is, instead of returning this, we still want the 200, but now I just want to return users. Now there's something I want to point out before we actually test this. So currently users is empty and it's a slice, so you might expect this to return an empty slice or an empty JSON array. But that's not actually what it's going to do. It's instead just going to return null. Now the reason for this is that the way that we're declaring this variable. So let's do another one called users2 and initialize this in a bit of a different way. So we have users and users2. So they're both initializing empty user slices, but this one actually initializes it as nil, or this one actually initializes it as an empty slice. And I'll show you guys what I mean by this exactly. So right now we're returning users. So in here we're returning users. Let's go to Postman. You can see that we're actually returning null. So now let me change this to users2 and start the server up again. So now if we run this, we're returning an empty array. So the reason that I point this out is because in both cases we're returning 200s. And let's say maybe if you're connecting this to a front end, and let's say you're mapping over this or something like that, it would actually throw an error if you try to map over null. So you want to know exactly what you're always returning to your end user. So that's just a side note. I'm going to carry on using the user one, so the initial one. So now let's create some more endpoints, so some basic CRUD. But before we do that, you might notice that this is going to get a bit unorganized if we keep attaching to this. So what we're going to do is create a group. So I'm going to say /users. So this is the relative path. And this actually returns to us a router group. So I'll point it to a router group. So let's call this user routes. And then instead of R, we can do user routes.get. So now this path, so whatever we put here is appended to the end of here. So something you often see is that this will just be placed in curly braces so that the indentation makes it clear that this belongs to here. Otherwise you'd have to specifically look for this. So this is just for developers organization. So now let's just test that out. So if I test out just base, we should get 404. So page not found. But if I do users, we are now getting null. which is this function here. So that's working nicely. So now let's create another endpoint. So user routes.post, and this is going to be once again the root path for this users. And let's create a create user. So let's initialize that function. So with create user, we're going to expect some JSON, and that JSON is going to have a structure similar to this. And then what we're going to do with that JSON is append it to this, so add it to our fake database here. So the way that we would do this is, well, I like to create a variable called request body, and this is going to be of type user. And Gin has a function called should bind JSON. Sorry, a method called should bind JSON. And it accepts an interface here, but what you want to return to it, what you want to pass to it is a pointer to a structure. So what it's going to try and do is bind the JSON to this. Now this does return an error, so let's say error is equal to that, and if error is not equal to nil, what we want to do is do c.json, let's say 422, so unprocessable entry. And let's just do gin.h, so to return a map interface, to return a string value with a interface. And let's say error true. And let's just also add in a message. So this is how I like to structure my error messages. And the message is invalid request body. So you might want to standardize this through maybe a structure, or maybe pretty much anything you want really. But just for the sake of this video, I want it to be simple, so we're just going to be using this. But generally, I do strongly recommend standardizing your error messages. Now, there's something I want to point out here, and is that here all we're doing is saying c.json, and then we're writing this stuff. We're not actually exiting this function, and that might be a bit strange, but I can show you guys what I mean. So if I do c, well, let's first carry on as normal, and then I'll show you guys the error afterwards. So let's say users is equal to append users, and we want to append request body. So that's all we're doing here, is just appending the user from the user that was created from the JSON body, and then we're appending it to users, so just adding it on. Then we want to do c.json. We want to say 200, and then gin.h error false. And once again, you probably also want to standardize your success responses. So now here you can see we're writing to the response here, and we're also doing it here. So what's actually going to happen is we're going to get two responses, and that's going to be a bit strange, but let's see how that works out. So let's just allow this. Let's do a post. So yeah, let's just first create the error. So c.shouldbindJSON will throw an error if we have an empty array, empty JSON string. So let's just do that. And you can see here we get the error. So error true, message, and valid request body, but we also get the error false. Now you might also notice here that the response status is 422. So this doesn't get overwritten, and this just gets appended to the writer. So all we want to do to fix that is just say return. So if I restart the server and post, you can see we only get the error message now. This code never executes. Okay, so let's also just actually try and create something. So let's say name, and let me set this to JSON. So name John, age 21. So we get error false. So this c.shouldbindJSON works. And if we actually go to get, you can see we have it here. So one thing we're forgetting to do is add in the ID, and we're also not doing any validation. So I'll show you guys what I mean by that. If I pass in an empty JSON string, it's actually not going to throw an error. And what that does is it initializes this with all nil values. So I can show you guys that here. So this is the nil for string, string and int. So yeah, I'm not going to deal with validation in this video, but that would actually be a video in itself, and there are slightly different ways you can handle that, so I'm going to leave that out for this video. But let's add in the ID. So request body.id is equal to uuid.new.string. So uuid is from the Google uuid package. New just creates a new UUID, and this actually returns UUID, and the only method that we care about right now is string. So let's restart our server. Let's post, let's say name John again and age 31. So that was successful. And then if we check here, we now have a UUID. And if I was to do the same thing again, and then get that, you can see it's actually different. So UUIDs are unique. Okay, so that's great. Let's next do the edit. So let's create a new user route. It's going to be a put and edit user. So I want to have some sort of way of knowing which user we're editing. So to do that, at the end of this path here, I want to allow the user to enter sort of like a wildcard. So this ID can be whatever they want. So I'll give an example. So it could be, and this would be actually the unique ID, the UUID. So this, for example, as a put request to this endpoint would trigger this route here, and this could be anything. So this part here could change and it will still trigger this endpoint here, and we can actually access what this value here is. So let's do that now. So edit, so func edit user, accepts the gin context. So to get the ID is actually c.program, and the key is just going to be ID. So the key is whatever this is. Now something you should keep in mind is C returns a string. Prem returns a string, and this could be an empty string, so you want to validate that. Although in our case it can't be, because if this is an empty string, this endpoint would never be hit. If that was an empty string, it would hit this endpoint. So these are actually two distinctly different endpoints, so this will actually never be nil. But in our case, an ID as a string is actually what we want. If you look at our users, ID is a string. So in our case it's fine, but let's say you have an SQL database which has an auto-incrementing ID of type int. You're going to actually want to convert this into int, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so now what we want to do is the same thing that we did here. So I'm just going to actually copy and paste it. So just find the request body, bind the JSON into that request body, and validate that. Well, not validate it, but just make sure we don't get an error. And then now we want to actually find this ID. So what I'm going to do is a for loop where we have the index, the let's say u for user is equal to range of users. And then what I want to do is for each one I want to check if the user.id is equal to the ID, so this here. So if these are equal, then that means we found it and we want to edit this one. And we can use the index for that. So users index I, so whichever one is found, dot name, we want to set this equal to a request body's name. So request body name, and then I'm just copy and paste this and do the same thing for age. Once we're done with that, we've done all the functionality that we need to do. So we can do a c.json, return a 200 with, let's just say, gin.h, error, false. And then if this never, and also we have to return, we can't forget to do that, otherwise it would actually continue going. So if this never returns, then that means the ID is invalid. So we want to do c.json, let's do a 404, gin.h, so to get that interface, to get that map I mean, so error true, and then a message invalid user ID. So now let's test this endpoint. So let's restart our server. We initialize this as a /ID, so let's get that. Actually, first we have to add some users. So let me just add this one. Let me just say James, who's 21, and let's get them to find their IDs. So let's take James here. So we're going to grab this one's user UUID. We're going to do / that UUID as a put request. So here it's James and 21. Let's set this to max and 50. So we get error false. If we go back to the get, and let's remove this, you can see we have max and 50. Let's once again go back to the put and let's do a invalid UID. We get invalid user ID. So everything's working fine. The final endpoint that we want to add is the delete. So it's going to be delete, and it's actually going to be the same as this put where we expect an ID. And then let's say delete user. So in this case, we don't really care about getting any JSON, so we're not going to handle that. All we really care about is the ID, because we're going to be deleting it, so no JSON really matters. We're going to do another for loop, where we loop through all the users. We're going to check if the user.id is equal to the ID. So if they are equal and it's a match, then what we want to do is remove this user from users. So Golang doesn't really have a slice method or anything like that. So we have to take out ourselves. So the way that we do this, it might sound a bit confusing, but hopefully I can explain this to the best of my ability. What we want to do is say users is equal to append users, where we want to get from, so we want to get all of the elements up until I, but not including I. So the way that we do this is like this. So this gets all of the elements up to I, up to I, but it doesn't actually get I itself. So we have so you can think of it like this. So if we have an array of a bunch of numbers, a slice of a bunch of numbers, let's call this T. Then if we were to do this, T, let's say 1, actually let's just do 2 and let's add a couple more here. So this would actually be equal to, so 2 is here, so 0, 1, 2. So it wouldn't get this, but it would get these two. So that is what this would be equal to. And then we want to now get the rest of these, but not including this one, because let's pretend we're trying to take out this one. So what we do is, you might think we do this, but what this would do is it would go 0, 1, so 0, 1, 2, and it would also actually include 2, so this would return that. But we're trying to get rid of this, so what we can do is say +1, so that'll be 3. So we'll do 0, 1, 2, 3, and we'll just get these two. So this way now, if we were to combine these two, it would look like this. So we would have spliced out the 44. So we're going to do something very similar with index. So we're going to do users I +1, and then get all of those values. Now the reason this is throwing an error is because append actually expects a variadic parameter of type whatever this is, so type user, but here we're actually passing in a slice, so we can extract all of the values with 3 periods at the end. So this is how we're going to splice out the last index, so, the whatever this I index is. I know this might sound a little bit confusing at first, but I recommend reading up the Google Docs on slices and arrays, and they have some decent documentation on how this works. So yeah, if that all goes well, then we want to do c.json, gin.h, error false, and then remember to return. If we never find it, then that means it's an invalid ID. So c.json 404 gin.h error true. Message is just going to be invalid ID, user ID. So now we can test this. If we restart the server, let's first create some. So so let's create a couple of users. So Max, James, and then let's just create one called delete me, so it's easy to identify, and let's get all of them. I'm going to duplicate this, create a delete, so set the method to delete, grab this one's ID, say slash that ID, and then send. So this is successful. Let's now get the users again. Hopefully this one should be deleted. And yeah, we still have Max and James, and we no longer have the other one. If we send this again, this will send an error saying invalid user ID. So everything's working fine. So I hope that helps you guys get into Golang and creating APIs. You can see it's not too difficult. Some things I didn't go over in this video are how to connect to a database, how to validate the JSON request. But I can get into that in other videos, so let me know if you guys want to see those. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.